This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and today is Monday, and that means it's time for the 584th MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition, and today we're going to take a look at Oblivion Ring effects. These effects get their name from, well, Oblivion Ring, an enchantment that exiles a non-land permanent until it leaves the battlefield. While the ring is not actually the very first time this effect was used, similar effects had appeared on cards like Oubliette and Faceless Butcher. The printing of Oblivion Ring in 2007's Lorwyn did mark the beginning of this type of effect being used regularly, especially on white cards. Ever since then, we've seen more than 100 variants of this type of effect. This effect can be quite effective, as it gets around things like indestructibility, and exiling a creature is just usually going to be better than sending it to the graveyard. At the same time, this type of effect is actually quite balanced, because it does give your opponent the opportunity to get their creature back if they can destroy your permanent. Overall, as we'll see with this list, this effect has proven to be quite powerful. To make it on this list, a card had to be a permanent that exiles a permanent of some type until it leaves the battlefield. In all, there are 123 cards that have an effect that qualifies, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. Alright, let's dive into the list. At number 10, it is Brutal Cathar. This is a 3-mana 2/2 creature that exiles an opposing creature when it enters the battlefield. Putting this kind of effect on a creature can be great because it allows you to add something to the board while also subtracting from your opponents. At the same time, creatures with Oblivion Ring effects are also much easier to remove than permanents of most other types, so they are also a little bit harder to count on as a more permanent form of removal, but Brutal Cathar has a ton of additional upside. It exiles something both when it enters the battlefield and when it transforms into Brutal Cathar, giving it the potential to exile multiple things, and when it's transformed, it's a 3-mana 3/3 with First Strike that makes your opponent 3 life just to target it, so at least it's a little harder to deal with on the werewolf side. Brutal Cathar is likely to gain more points in the future. At number 9, it is Temporary Lockdown. This enchantment doesn't exile just one permanent until it leaves the battlefield. Instead, it exiles every non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. This is great against a deck that is low to the ground and can feel especially good against creature tokens because your opponent will never get those back. It has largely seen sideboard play in Standard, Modern, and Historic, but it actually sees significant main deck play in Blue-White control decks and Pioneer. Many of that format's best decks are hugely reliant on cheap creatures, so running one in the main deck tends to be a good idea. It's going to gain more points in the future. At number 8, it is Chained to the Rocks. This is a 1-mana Oblivion Ring effect that can hit creatures, but there's a catch. You have to be able to attach it to a mountain, which makes for some pretty great flavor, but yeah, it isn't really a mono-white card. It only does its thing consistently if you're in a red-white deck. It was played a ton while it was in Standard, showing up in aggressive Boros decks that loved having a cheap removal spell to get blockers out of the way, and in more controlling decks that just loved having efficient removal. It has also gained points in modern burn decks. Pioneer is where it's done the most though. There it's been played in Boros aggro decks, but has seen far more play in Fires of Invention decks. These decks look to get its powerful enchantment in play, and look to run cheap early game removal to make it so they can survive long enough to get their value engine online. Chained to the Rocks looks well positioned to gain more points in Pioneer, and it could also find some more success in Modern in the future. At number 7, it is Banishing Light. This card is a lot like the original Oblivion Ring, has the same mana cost, it's an enchantment, and it almost has the same effect because it can exile any non-land permanent. The only difference is that it only lets you target opposing permanents with it. That doesn't make a huge difference, but it does technically make it less flexible. The main reason for that change is so that someone can't loop 3 of them forever, which you can do with the original Oblivion Ring. It's gained most of its points in Standard, a format where it has received 2 legal printings. Anytime it's in Standard, it is going to see play because of its ability to deal with any kind of permanent, but it hasn't quite been good enough to catch on in many other formats, though it has seen sporadic play in both Pioneer and Modern. Without another Standard legal reprint, it is unlikely that Banishing Light will gain more points. At number 6, it is Glass Casket. This 2-mana artifact can exile creatures with a mana value of 3 or less until it leaves the battlefield. The Casket is an efficient way to deal with cheap threats, especially the ones that are problematic if they end up in the graveyard. For example, in Standard, it was used regularly to exile Uro and Cauldron Familiar. These 2 creatures are powerful value engines, and killing them in a traditional way doesn't remove the threat they represent for very long. It also sees significant sideboard play in Pioneer, and even makes it in the main deck in blue-white artifact decks, which can get extra value out of this card's type. It's likely to gain more points in Pioneer going forward. At number 5, it is Deputy of Detention. Like Brutal Cathar, this is a creature that can do the Oblivion Ring thing, and in this case it can even exile non-land permanents, like Oblivion Ring. It also adds the extra effect that all other cards with the same name as the card you exile also get exiled. As I've mentioned, Oblivion Ring effects are already really good against tokens, but the Deputy is especially good because it can get rid of all of them. Obviously, it's also good in any situation where your opponent has multiples of something in play. Like many of the cards on this list, it has seen play in a wide variety of decks in a wide variety of formats. For example, in Standard, you could find it in Bant Aggro and Blue-White Control. In Pioneer, it's been played in Spirit Aggro as well as Fires of Invention. In Modern, it's been played in Humans, Spirits, and Collected Company decks more generally. It's a pretty sweet toolbox creature to hit with Company, since there are lots of situations where it really improves the board for you. The Deputy has slowed down significantly in Modern, but it has picked up more and more in Pioneer, so it's still likely to gain more points. At number 4, it is Portable Hull. This 1-mana Oblivion Ring can hit any non-land permanent with a mana value of 2 or less. That's a pretty good rate, as it can deal with most early plays, and taking down something that costs 2 feels particularly good. Portable Hull has quickly become a multi-format all-star. The more powerful formats get, the more cheap permanents people tend to play, so the Hull has a whole lot of targets in formats like Modern and Legacy. It gets really nice in decks that can get more value out of the artifact type, and it sees play in those types of decks in Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy. It has a very good chance at moving higher and higher up the list in the future. At number 3, it is Palace Jailer. This 4-mana 2/2 makes you the Monarch when it enters the battlefield. As long as you're the Monarch, you draw a card at the beginning of your instep. This means that the Jailer gets pretty close to giving you a 3-for-1 right away. You stop being the Monarch when your opponent's creature does combat damage to you. This card has a variation on the typical Oblivion Ring effect because its exile effect ends when you're no longer the Monarch instead of when it leaves play. The Jailer is from Conspiracy, Take the Crown, which means the only 60-card formats it's legal in are Legacy and Vintage, but it is heavily played in both formats since it can give you so much value. In particular, it sees play in Hate Bear decks that can easily tutor up cards that are good in the right situation, and the Jailer is a great card to grab on many board states. It's going to keep gaining points in the Eternal formats going forward. At number 2, it is Detention Sphere. This card is the one that inspired the later Deputy of Detention, and it has the same effect, where it exiles a non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name until it leaves the battlefield. It's been played in blue-white control decks in Standard, Modern, Pioneer, and Legacy. It's actually slowed down significantly of late, and is only gaining points in Pioneer these days, so it may eventually get passed by cards like Palace Jailer and Portable Hull. And Magic's number 1 Oblivion Ring effect is, what else but Oblivion Ring itself. This is the card that the effect is named for. It's a 3-mana enchantment that can exile any non-land permanent until it leaves the battlefield. It's seen play in multiple formats, but Standard is by far where it's done the most work. It's been legal in Standard on 3 different occasions, allowing it to gain almost 100 points in that format. More recently, it's been played in Pauper. There aren't any other Oblivion Ring effects at Common, so it is really the only one you have access to in the format, making it pretty premium. It's likely to keep gaining points in Pauper going forward. It is unlikely to receive another Standard legal reprint though, as Wizards of the Coast prefers these days for cards to have May effects or only hit opposing permanents. Plus, the whole Oblivion Ring loop thing I talked about earlier is a problem, and it's no longer seeing significant play anywhere but Pauper, so it may eventually lose its spot on the list to the more active cards behind it. So, those are the top 10 Oblivion Ring effects in Magic. If you're interested in exiling your opponent's permanents, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including more than 560 other MTG Top 10s, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can do that by becoming a patron or a channel member, and you can find ways to do those things in the description. Thanks for watching.